All right. Do you want to start or do you want me to start, Don?
Welcome to another edition of Trail Runner Nation. My name is Don Freeman.
And my name is Scott Warr, and today we're going to learn a little bit more about Mika Thewes. And in fact, I should ask you if that's the right pronunciation, Mika. Is it Mika Thewes?
Yeah, Mika Thewes.
Thewes. Okay. I'm putting like a second half a syllable in there. And today we have Mika Thewes, who is the recent Bigfoot 200 champion and new course record holder for the female division. And we met Mika, Don and I met Mika 6 years ago at Bigfoot, at 2017's Bigfoot 200 when Don ran, and I kind of drove around and carried his Oreos around from aid station to aid station. And Mika was kind of about the same pace as Don, and so we met her at a number of different aid stations. And so she's run this race 5 times, and each time has improved upon the past time. And we thought, you know, that's pretty neat. And we wanted to talk about that. There's a lot of us that may go back to a race over and over. And we wanted to talk to her about how she does that, why she does that, and how does she prepare so that she can become faster each time.
Welcome to the podcast, Mika.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. It's great to see you again after so long.
I know it, and in fact, you look like you are faster now. What has made you so fast over these 5 years? Because I was lucky enough to be at my faster time, and you were at your slower time, so we got to connect. There's no chance for me talking to you unless we schedule a podcast. What has made you so fast, Mika?
There's a lot. I would say experience definitely helps a lot in the long run, and just in terms of race strategy. And then obviously I was a lot younger and were just less trained back then. And so for sure, like I spent 10 years of my early running career just pretty much doing long, slow miles. And then it was only in the last 2 years or so that I did more focused training. And I started doing like heart rate based and time based training. And that's once I started doing that, it definitely made me a lot faster because I just did have that giant base that I had built up. So in terms of training, that helped. But there's also a lot. Obviously, the 200s are much more than the shorter distances. It's more of like a puzzle because there are so many moving parts that you have to kind of get right, that knowing a lot more and like having a good strategy going into each aid station definitely will help take hours off your time, even if you're not running significantly faster.
You know, Mika, before we get into that, because that's really the meat of this episode, but I'm just curious, you've run Bigfoot 5 times, you've run the Tahoe 200. These are all races by Courtney, these are all races by Candace Burt, the Destinations Trail race series. But you've run, 9 or 10 of these 200s. How did you get started with the 200? What made you think, you know what, I think that may be a distance that I want to pursue?
Yeah, this was my 12th 200 plus mile race.
Sorry.
Yeah, you know, back in the early days, like I got started kind of right around the time when they got started because I did the first Bigfoot back in 2015. And back then it was, nobody really knew much about the distance at all. And I was like 24 and I had done a couple hundreds and some shorter distances. And, you know, I jumped in pretty quick. I went from a marathon straight to a 50 miler and a year later did my first 100. But no one was ready for what Bigfoot was that first year. I mean, none of us knew what the course was like. I had never done a mountain race before. Like, there were all kinds of like experienced people that were like, "Oh, I never get blisters," and everyone had the worst blisters. But just like, you know, it was just the idea of like pushing yourself and just like the adventure of like going out there and being with a bunch of people who also thought spending like a couple days in the mountains like was a good idea when none of us knew what it would be like. And there were so many things that went wrong that first year, but everyone was so much fun and so welcoming that it definitely, after that first year, I knew I was going to come back and do more just because the community was already shaping up to be so great and welcoming.
Yeah, 2015, there wasn't a lot to find out and research about the 200-mile distance. You guys were a bunch of just adventurers going out to find out what this thing's going to be about. What was the vibe like? What was the, what was it like to mix it up before? And what was the conversation going out when you were going out in the unknown? No one knew what was going to come up, what they were up against. There are some aid stations that are quite far apart. We're used to running like maybe 6 miles. We see an aid station, 7 miles, but there are sections that are much further than that. How did you guys even wrap your heads around that?
Yeah, it was very like old school vibe, at the check-in, everyone was like really chill. There were like 60 of us that finished that year. Like it was a tiny race. But everyone, and like trackers weren't mandatory that year. So like half the field didn't have any tracking on. And 2 people got lost for a significant amount of times that didn't have trackers. So that was interesting. But yeah, I mean, we made our best guesses, but it was more of just those of us that were pretty dedicated to sticking it out and just pushing through no matter what. Like I was miserable that year. I ran a good chunk of it with my friend Joel. We ran like 160 miles together, and we had met like 2 days before. And by the end, we were great friends.
Right.
But
Mika, I have a question for you. You mentioned that the community got you hooked that first year, and I've been there. I've been a crew and a little bit of a pacer for Don in 2017. Do you think that the community of the 200 milers is different than the other trail distances? Do you think it's different?
I do. I mean, I'm maybe a little biased on this, but I think it's like the best of all of them. It's just so much smaller. And so the people that do come back again and again, like we all get to know each other. So each like race feels like a mini reunion, and you see all your old friends that you've known again and again. And like I have, I know friends that have gotten married and then they have kids. And so you're asking like suddenly their kids are like many years older, but you get to hear about how their lives have been going. And and not that the shorter distances aren't welcoming, but it's a totally different vibe when you have like these 200 runners, because it's just such a bigger kind of commitment, or just such a different kind of a race. And you have a lot of people that are helping each other during the race, and everyone wants to see everyone else succeed, which I'm sure is true for the shorter distances, but you just maybe don't spend as much time together, so you don't get as much of the feeling of camaraderie that you get at the 200s. And so I think the 200 community is just that much more welcoming and supportive of each other.
And you're so right. In my experience, it wasn't 200 people that you were running with, because there were people that you may never see except for the start and hopefully the finish. But I remember running around a group of 6 to 8 runners that we just always traded spots. We just kind of moved through the 200 at our pace, and then we looked out for each other. Hey, have you seen the guy at the green shirt? Have you seen him lately? I haven't seen him. Where is he? Oh yeah, he's just ahead of us. Oh great. We really kept an eye on each other, and of course helped one another. What do I have? What do you need? Much like any other race, any distance, but there's greater risk in the 200 because there might be 15 or 18 miles to your next aid station, and some of those were long stretches. In some, they were out there, and that's when you really needed to link, arms together and help one another, because you can't leave somebody out in the middle of a mountain when they're a long ways away from help. So you really get to. Why are you laughing, Scott?
I'm just still baffled that you call him the guy in the green shirt. Didn't you find out what his name was, Don?
At first,
the guy in the green shirt.
And the problem with that, at first he was in a green shirt, then he changed shirts, so I had to learn his name.
The guy with the green shirt, he's lost. Oh no, he just changed his shirt. You never knew what his name was. He just changed his shirt.
You're a green shirt guy. But there was, there was red, white, and blue shorts guy. I remember all these people. Mika, did you experience any of that? Anything that I said there, did it seem true to you, or was it just me?
Oh no, it's definitely true. And just like I think even this year during the race, I made a mistake and ditched my filter bottle way too early. And it was interesting because pretty much the entire race, the only other racer I saw was Killian, so it was just me and Killian going back and forth. But at one point he let me use his filter bottle to take a liter of water, and I was so grateful. We're racing, right? But we're also looking out for each other for sure, and making sure the other person's not having too much issues. But even beyond that, just in terms of watching out for the other racers, for sure, even things like you're heading out into the second night and you don't want to do it solo, and there's two other people at the aid station, you're like, hey, you guys want to stick together and maybe hike this section in a group, or someone gets freaked out because they see wildlife and you're like, oh, just come on hike with us, we'll all stick together for a little bit. There's definitely a lot more of that, and you just don't really see that as much at the hundreds, maybe just because it's faster, and it's not like you're hiking together one night. There's so many nights, right? It doesn't, if you're trying to be competitive, maybe at the hundreds you don't want someone with you all night, but at the 200s you have another day after that, so it doesn't really matter where everyone is that specific time.
Scott, what she's saying is the hundreds are short. That's what I heard her say. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had to write that down just to make sure that I heard it right. From my perspective, being at the Bigfoot 200 a few years ago with Don, the crews also bond quite a bit, because as Don mentioned, the aid station, between each aid station could be 3, 4, 5, 6 hours for the runners, and so you're sitting at an aid station talking to the same people for a good amount of time, and there's some friendships that I developed just as a crew there. The question for you, Mika, and really the only time that we spent a whole lot of time with you was that year in 2017, and you did not have a crew or a pacer. Is that how you've approached all of these races? Are you a solo runner?
So this was actually the very first year I brought a crew with me out there. So my mom was out there, and I had a friend from Colorado come out. And so they met me at maybe 5 of the aid stations. I did not try to make them go to all of them. I know how complicated crewing Bigfoot is, just because it's an insane amount of driving, I know, from what I've heard of the crews, and the roads are so hard to follow. But I do tend to do them solo, but Tahoe last year, I had crew and a pacer, and I have tended to get random pacers of the last couple years. I had my friend was out there to pace someone else, and then his runner dropped, and so he just paced me instead. Or my other friend was volunteering, and so he met me at the 50 miles out aid station at Klickitat last time I did it in 2021, and he paced me. But that wasn't planned. It was just hey, I'll be here. Do you want someone to crew or to run in with you? And I was like, yeah, that'd be fun. I'd love to, chat for a while. So I do like doing them solo just because it is so much fun to just find other runners to run with and chat with. And it's so hard to ask someone to spend that much time just to crew you or pace you. And I do so many of them that I would feel really bad if I was always asking people to come help me.
Mika, I didn't have any trouble asking Scott, and I would ask him again, no problem. If you ever need somebody, Scott is a great crew pacer. He'll be there for you.
My excuse is if I'm asked to crew, that means I don't have to enter the race. That's the whole thing. If I never have to enter the race and just crew, I mean that's success for me.
And then you could just get your runner to buy you the merch and wear your Bigfoot shirt around and say, I was out there for days crewing. I drove 500 miles.
Literally, there's 500 miles at Bigfoot if you're in a car, only 200 if you have to run.
Yeah, that's why you should just sign up and run it.
Yeah, come on, Scott. Mika and I will crew and pace you, so you don't
Yeah,
worry about
yeah.
that. Go ahead and sign up. Hey, earlier in the podcast, Mika, you mentioned I didn't get fast until I started doing heart rate and time-based training. And if I was listening to this, I would say, whoa, stop. How come these guys didn't follow up on that comment? What is heart rate and time-based training? How do you define it, and how did you do it? So maybe we can too.
So I actually have been self-coached for pretty much my entire running career. But then last year I did end up, for 2021, I hired a coach for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So I had Luke Nelson. I think he's with Evoke Endurance now, but he was really great. And so he kind of really changed up my training, and so like got me started on the heart rate stuff and time based instead of just like mileage based. And so since I had such a big just base built up, he said that, he was hopeful that it would work pretty well for me, and it ended up working really well. And I'm not one who enjoys all the tech stuff, and I hate having to wear a watch all the time, but
Huh.
I did eventually get used to it. And so it was just like, you're just trying to get your aerobic heart rate, basically having that stay at about, in the aerobic area, but getting faster. And so, like, yeah, you'll go out for a 4 mile run at the beginning of the training cycle and only get, you know, 18 miles in, but by the end you're doing like 25 or whatever because your heart rate is still low. And so that's like the rate you can like recover from. And so you're not like, which is the most important thing for the 200s, right? Because if you're running for 3 days, you don't want to be pushing yourself to the point where your body can't recover from it. So that was really helpful in terms of kind of switching up the training.
Were you surprised when you saw it actually work? So much time self-coaching and then going over to what sounds like Maffetone's system too. And Luke Nelson, we need to link him just in case people want to try to find a coach and like the way this sounds. And we should do that. Were you surprised that it actually worked? Like, wow, I just did 22 miles instead of 18 in these 4 hours. I never thought that was possible. I'm kind of blown away.
Yeah, I was really surprised because I just saw my times keep dropping and was like, huh, like, I mean, everything happens when it happens, right? And, if I didn't have such a strong base, maybe it wouldn't have worked so well, but I was definitely surprised to see, like, and honestly, like, so I did that going into Tahoe last year, and that was probably like the best shape I've ever been in my life. Like, and I've been trying to get back to that. I'm not quite there, but it was definitely, yeah, it was very fast. I felt like going into Tahoe.
So I'm still a little confused. I mean, I know what heart rate training is, but how was it different than what you were doing before? So pre-Luke, Coach Luke, post Coach Luke, what changed? What did Monday's training run look like versus after Coach Luke?
Yeah, so since I was trying to keep kind of like an average heart rate for every run, I actually had to run a lot faster for my long runs. And so, like, all of my runs, instead of being like running based on feeling like, oh, I should be going easier, I was actually running significantly harder for like pretty much all my runs. And then I would have like a couple, like one easy day where I didn't have to worry about that at all. And then like a workout every week where I was trying to go not just stay in that kind of aerobic base, but like push higher and do like zone 3 or zone 4 or whatever it
Okay.
was. But I was basically, because I had to maintain that average heart rate, had to run a lot faster during my runs. And so, you're not like pushing to the point where everyone's feeling like you're, dying or anything. But for sure, I would not have run that fast if I wasn't trying to kind of hit that heart rate. And so, yeah, it was just a much faster for most of the training.
So that happened on training. Can you kind of take us to the race? You've run these things, multiple times. Now you've got this new training program going. how did the race feel? Did you say, I shouldn't be at this aid station yet? Or I remember this hill being a little bit tougher. Did you experience a aha moment saying, you know what, Coach Luke is pretty smart because this is working out for me?
Yeah, I mean, so that was going into Tahoe. So, you start on that ski hill.
Yeah.
And so we all went up. And then by the time we topped out on that climb, like before even the first aid station, 10 miles in, I was already in the lead. And I was like, oh, I feel good. Like, I'm just going to, run at a pace that feels good. But, previously, right, it's like, oh, Mika's consistent. She'll like start in the back and then everyone else slows down and she stays kind of moving well. And the idea is you can always like come from behind and end up in front. But after I started kind of mixing up the training, and there was some mental blocks to get over, I guess, and just be like, well, if you're moving at a reasonable pace for you, just because you're in front, 10 miles into the race doesn't mean you're going to blow up. And so, yeah, I was definitely like way ahead of the way I used to race. And like even at Bigfoot this year, I went out pretty fast, but I've kind of learned to like not be afraid of starting in front now, because you never know how fast you can run if you don't try, right? So if you go out fast, like why not go out fast and see if you can just maintain it?
You have 3 days that you can adjust that if you need to, right?
Yeah, and after seeing what Michael McKnight did at Cocodona, right? Like he totally was super dehydrated and totally got messed up that first day, but was able to, the race is so long, you can adjust, fix things, and still win the race and pass like everyone.
You're right. As I recall, there was a moment at Moab, which is in a 240-mile race, one on Candace's series, and I was just done and wanted to quit. And it was, I think, day and a half, whatever it was. And I said, I'm just done, and I'm going to quit. And I said, well, you know what? If I'm going to quit, I might as well go sleep as long as I want. I slept like 5 hours, and I just slept. And I woke up and I said, I'm so glad I didn't quit because I'm ready to go again. You can change your entire race just by hitting pause and going to sleep for a while. And it doesn't matter. It could be in a tent. It could be by a big log halfway to the next aid station. Just go to sleep and take it easy and don't quit. Give your body a chance to recover. Eat a lot of food and go to sleep.
That is great advice. And I actually ran an aid station at Bigfoot last year. And any good like aid station person knows like when runners are trying to drop, like especially when they have a lot of time, it's like you can drop to me like in a couple hours, get some sleep first, wake up, see how you feel, and I'll take your tracker when you wake up. But don't give it to me now. Like go to sleep first. We'll see how you feel. You have lots of time before you have to make that decision. And so, yeah, the aid station people are usually pretty good about just sending people to bed.
Go to your room, go to bed. I've heard that before.
Hey, Mika, I'm curious, speaking of sleep, how has your sleep strategy changed over 12 200 milers? Are you sleeping less? Are you sleeping more?
It's changed very drastically. When you start to get into this, you're like, oh, I have to plan out my sleeps and know where I'm going to do what. And then eventually I got to the point where, and then sometimes you're like, totally give up on that. And you're just planning to do dirt naps. And then you're like, dirt naps are so inefficient. And so now I don't plan my sleep out as much. But then that really blew up in my face at Cocodona this year, where I forgot that it was not a 200-mile race, but a 250-mile race. And so you're not running for 60 hours, you're running for 70 plus hours. And I put off sleep way too long and just completely blew up at the end of that race. And so that was not great. But since then, for Bigfoot, I just took the idea of like, if I'm tired, I'm just like, I usually only sleep for about like 10 to 20 minutes at a time. So, if you're tired the first night, take 10 minutes. 10 minutes is not going to wreck your race, but it could save it later. So, that first night I didn't actually sleep, but I like shut my eyes for 10 minutes, which I typically would never have done before just because, oh no, you don't have to sleep the first night, just push through. But like, yeah, 10 minutes won't wreck your race. Take 10 minutes whenever you're tired, and it tends to serve you well later on.
So for us listening, in a 24-hour period, on average, 24-hour period, how much of that is sleep and how much is running? Do you have a sense of that? It's just maybe it's just whatever you need. I don't know.
Yeah, it's pretty much whatever you need. And it really is based on the hours you're running. So, like for Tahoe last year and Bigfoot this year, I mean, in terms of actual sleep, I got 10 minutes the entire race.
Oh, wow. Well,
and I shut my eyes for maybe another half hour at this race, but I didn't actually fall asleep. But that's just when you're running for like 60 hours or less, that's reasonable. But once you get into the longer distances, right, like 70 plus hours, you probably need about an hour spread out. It's like, this is all just based on experience. It's no.
Okay. Well,
I don't know what the science would be.
Well, there's no science. You're kind of a freak of nature because that's not a lot of sleep. Okay. Well, I expressed earlier, I'm going to go to sleep for 5 hours, and that's like four or five races for you. So, so you're unusual in that respect. For me, I slept. What did I sleep, Scott? 2 to 3, 4 hours. I don't know, a day.
All I know is we finally got it dialed in. Where when you came into the aid station, I would go start the car and crank the heat and make it as hot as possible. And you would take one of Candace's moving blankets and go and curl up in the car. And the car was running. The seat heaters were on, and you'd sit in there for about 30 minutes, and then have some food, and then you were back on the trail. You're fresh as a daisy.
How did that car smell, Scott? When I gave it back to you.
Crews may suffer a little bit different than the runners out on the trail.
Have I apologized? Go ahead.
I'm always amazed by what the crews allow, like the runners, to get in the state they allow the runners in their car. Because I'm like, if that was my car, I would never let a person that looked like that in there.
It was a rental. Admittedly, it was a rental, and I often wonder, and I think Don and I kind of laughed and giggled as we dropped off the rental for the person that had to clean that car out, because, boy, it was not in good condition. I've returned cars in much better condition before. Mika, you said something earlier that I want to dive into a little bit. You said that you can have a much faster finish time without running faster. And I think that comes to the strategy, the logistics. I want to get into that a little bit more. What have you learned over 12 races or 5 Bigfoots that allow you to finish faster with maybe not running faster?
Yeah, so it's really easy to spend a lot of time in the aid stations, right? Because you get in and you just want to sit there and spend all the time you can there. Because it's so nice, and everyone, at the aid station is so nice, and you can just relax. But it with the 13 aid stations, if you're spending 2 hours at each, that adds up so much. That's so much of the time that you're out on the course. And so trying to dial that in and just get in and out as fast as possible really can cut down a lot on your time, because if you don't have a plan going into the aid station and you're walking in and you're kind of out of it and you don't know what you need and you don't know what to do or what your plan is, then you just kind of sit there and you have to get your thoughts together for 10 minutes before you can even start doing anything. But having a really clear plan going in and knowing what order you're going to do everything in and what needs to get done. And then once you get into that aid station, it's basically a clock, and it's, how do I get out as fast as possible? And honestly, it helps cut down on time a lot. But also, when you go into an aid station with that mindset that okay, this needs to get done and then I need to get out, you don't really give yourself any time to think about well, I'm actually not feeling great. Maybe I should drop. Maybe I should, maybe I don't want to keep going. And so, like, especially if you're kind of feeling bad, to have like that strategy in place and just to get in and out and like let yourself feel bad again when you're out on the trail past the aid station kind of decreases the chances that you might be like, well, maybe I could just stay here.
It's kind of like jumping in very cold water. The longer you stand up there, the less likely you're going to jump in. So you just dive and go. So leaving the aid station is like jumping in a pool of cold water.
Yeah, exactly.
Mika, when do you create that strategy? Is that something you do before the gun goes off at the beginning of the race? Or as you're coming into an aid station, you're a mile or two out, do you construct that aid station plan?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously at this point I know kind of the general gist of what needs to get done. But yeah, it's going into the aid station. It also gives you something to think about when you're out on the trail.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you're like, okay, like how do I, like what needs to get done? How am I feeling? Do I need to change clothes here? Do I need to, you know, mm, check my feet or um, talk to a medic or whatever it is, get taped up really quick. And then, so knowing that going into the aid station, yeah, it's gives you a lot of time. You have a lot of time on the trail to formulate all that. So that's when I do it. It's like, an hour out of the aid station. You're like, okay, I know like the 5 things in order now.
Yeah, yeah.
So like in 2015, we really didn't have any resources to check in with, but we do now. In fact, we're speaking to someone that has completed 12 200-mile plus runs. And so I'd like to ask this question. What do you carry in your pack?
Ooh, good question.
What kind of things do you bring with you? I could imagine you could look like a backpacker if you wanted, or you could leave with nothing, like without a watch, and just go out there and try to keep minimal. What do you do? What's your strategy?
Yeah, I think I might carry a little more than most people. Like, especially when you're not crewed, you tend to carry a lot more stuff because you can't just have people shuttle it around. So
Yeah.
I've gotten burned before with things like puffy jackets and stuff. So I pick up my puffy jacket pretty early and I just carry it the whole race, even if it's like, 90 degrees every day, because I don't want to be in a situation where I want that. But other than that, there are like the main things that tend to be on the recommended gear list, right? So like a bivy, just in case you get caught or you screw up your sleeping and you have to do a trail nap, or, the filter bottles. Those are great now. I mean, I don't think we had those back in 2015, but those can be a total lifesaver. And then just like, mini like med kit, blister kit, obviously a bunch of extra calories, anti-chafe stuff, because you never want to be caught in between aid stations needing that. But yeah, I definitely carry a little bit extra in terms of like the clothing, especially just because you don't have the crew to shuttle it around. I have to carry my cold weather hat the whole time because I can't drop it off in the morning and pick it up for the evening.
You don't like to be cold, do you, Mika? That's what I hear. 90 degrees and puffy jacket stuffed in. I am not going to be caught in the weather change here in this mountain.
Yeah, there's a reason I haven't done Moab more than once. And that first year I was extremely cold and do not wish to be that cold ever again.
Which is the irony of Moab. You think middle of the Utah desert, it's going to be hotter than a Banshee, but deserts are cold.
Yeah, and that first year, it did get really hot, those first few sections. I mean, we were boiling, but then nighttime hit, and I think the range that year that you did it, Don, was like, it was like a high almost of 90, and then at Pole Canyon, it was 9 degrees.
Yeah, I remember
9
running.
degrees.
I remember running and needing to keep drinking so my hose didn't freeze, and it was just, I wasn't thirsty. I just needed to keep that water moving. It was cold. And I think the mountains there, the La Salles, it was snowing up there, the La Salles, right? And it was a test of environment, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's been even colder there since, because there's been multiple years they've had to do snow reroutes because the La Salles are impassable because of how much snow they've gotten.
Hey, Mika, what is your favorite go-to fuel source in your pack? Is there a Snickers bar that you hold for that situation where you're in the pain cave and you need some miraculous piece of nutrition to pull you out?
I've definitely gone through a lot of cycles of different kinds of food. I think early on I was known as like the girl who had like drop bags full of Mountain Dew and like sugar cereal.
That's
I've
right.
been trying to move past since.
Mika, that's how what I remember with meeting you. I found some Fruit Loops in a plastic bag, and I said, "Oh, that's somebody's." And I picked it up, and I thought, "I know who that is. That's Mika's, and she must be ahead of me because she must be." So I carried those and caught you and gave those to you. Maybe I caught you at the aid station. I don't think it was a cape on my back, but I remember returning those to you. That's one of my memories of Mika. Is that true?
Well, yeah, and so actually that was funny that year because I actually at one point I didn't realize like one of my bags of like cereal had opened as I was running. I was so out of it that section, and so I was leaving like a little trail of crunch berries on the trail, and people were like coming up being like, "Who was that like left a little trail to follow like Hansel and Gretel?" And I was like, "Oh no, I guess that would have been me. I had no idea I was doing that." But yeah, I got a lot of flack for leaving little trails for people to follow.
When you say out of it, those of us, we've all listening to this have run either a long training run or something, but out of it in a multi-day event can be a little bit different than just being tired, sore, and just fatigued. You can end up in a spot where you're mentally out of it and can kind of check out. Can you explain to us at least how you experience being out of it?
Yeah, so that was the year I had a really bad section. I had run really hard into one of the aid stations to try and get help for another runner. And then I just was completely spent. And I tried sleeping for a bit, but then I just left the aid station and I had not recovered enough from that. And it's really weird. Like, it's like this brain fog and like you can't really focus or concentrate. And it makes for some very slow sections when that happens. And so, yeah, you just kind of wander on the trail for a few hours and hopefully you eventually make it into the aid station, because the only thing that really fixes that is like a good solid sleep, because I think I got into that next aid station and slept for 4 hours or 3 hours, and once I woke up from that I was like kind of back to normal.
Got a freeze here.
Yeah, so yeah, the only thing that'll really fix that really bad brain fog tends to be either like a massive dose of caffeine or like a good solid sleep.
Go ahead, Scott.
Were you going to go something on that topic?
This. Yep. So I'm with you, Mika. I think with these multi-day and these super long things, you've got to take care of your body and your physiology, but you have to take care of your mental side too. You're balancing both of those. You don't want to break yourself mentally, because that could remove you as well. If you break yourself physically, metabolically, that will remove you. So there's a real balance, and you have to make sure you take care of both of those. At least that's what I found. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
So I want to get into the lesson that I learned from Mika in 2017. Mika was running about the same pace as Dawn, and so we met Mika a few times at different aid stations. And Mika is a very focused person. I don't know if that's the right word, or maybe tends towards maybe the introvert side. So she was very quiet as she came in the aid stations. And this is the thing that I remember watching, is she would sit down in the chair and she would meticulously, and took a lot of time doing this, like 30 minutes doing this. She would take off each sock and slowly unbandage each of her toes. Each of her toes were bandaged or taped. And then she would get some wet wipes and she would clean her feet, meticulously clean her feet. This is the way I remember it, Mika. You can correct me if I'm wrong, because I was a little sleep deprived too. And then she would dry her feet, and then she would get out a clean roll of tape and meticulously tape each of the toes, each of the hot spots on her feet, and then put the socks back on. And it took her a long time. And I remember going over to Don. I go, "You see that lady over there? She's like spending 30 minutes fixing her feet." And I didn't see a blister. She was preemptively taking care of her feet. And that's the lesson I learned from you, because I thought, that's ridiculous. Do you know how much time she's wasting? And then I thought, this is a 3-day race, and a blister could slow you down considerably. And she's taking that time, investing that time in keeping your feet intact. And I will tell you, I have photos of Dawn's feet at Bigfoot 200 in the hotel room, and they look like hamburger. And I would bet yours probably looked like you just went and got a pedicure. So tell me, I want to know where that comes from. How did you learn that? That was your second time at Bigfoot. How did you learn to take care of your feet, and why was that such a priority?
A lot of wisdom early on.
Right.
Yeah, I do pre-tape my feet, and sort of similar process to what you say. If there's any tape peeling, I'll replace it, but I don't typically take it all off. But after that first year at Bigfoot, I had such terrible blisters, and like everyone had such terrible blisters, and the only people that did seem to do at least a little bit okay were the ones that had pre-taped, which I'd never heard about doing before. And so I took the lesson from them and just researched on how to do it, and it was kind of trial and error. I tend to do a lot more, I think, than most people, just because at this point it's a little bit of a pre-race ritual. But I do do each toe individually, and I generally, as long as I'm not racing in the desert, I don't get any blisters. So I've just stuck to doing the same thing. But yeah, just taking off your socks every aid station, cleaning your feet. If they're wet, let them dry a bit, and then putting on a clean pair of socks, and fixing any of the tape that's peeled off. And that can really help your race, because the main things you have to manage at these things, right? It's you got to manage your feet, manage your stomach, and manage your sleep. And if you can kind of get a handle on all three of those things, you'll tend to have a relatively successful race.
That's really good stuff right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a couple questions, Scott. Number one, do you wear toe socks or regular socks during this race? Inquiring minds want to know. People out there maybe want to do the same thing.
I do wear the toe socks. I got into those kind of early, and I haven't really bothered trying to switch it up too much since.
Good. And how about shoe change? Well, I had two questions, Scott, and then you can go. Shoe change.
If I go through water, I usually like to change my shoes. If it's early on in the race, or it's hot and your feet dry out pretty quick, it's not usually big of an issue. But a section with big water crossings, usually dry shoes can be super nice for that.
Big cush shoes. I'm still going, Scott.
Yeah. I'm okay with you going.
Okay, real cushy shoes or minimalist shoes. What's your flavor?
I do the cushy shoes just because I tried more minimal that first year, and it really bit me. And gosh, you don't understand how sore your feet can get at a 3-day race or a 4-day race until you try to run it in minimal shoes. So definitely for me, it's cushy.
Yeah, and
as I recall, Don used the cushy shoes as a reward. He started with not a minimalist shoe, but a normal shoe. And I think maybe at mile 100 or something like that, that's when you changed into the cushy shoe, and you said it was just like a new race.
It was heaven. But and I wonder why I punished myself for the first part of the race. I should have looked at Mika and her shoes and said, why did I start early and treat myself right from the beginning?
Yeah, that was my, I tried to do that the first year too, start in the smaller shoes and transition into the cushy shoes. And then I'm like, yeah, exactly. Why would I do this to myself? Just start in the shoes that feel great, and then your feet won't hurt. And then the shoe change isn't like magic, and your feet just feel good the whole time.
Yeah.
This is a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So you're a toe sock believer. What about in training? Do you take the extra time when you go out on your daily run to put those toes in each of the little toe pockets, or do you just wear normal socks?
I just wear normal socks.
Yeah.
Too much time. You're right.
But putting tape on and then the toe sock, I mean, that has you need to practice that before a race, because that's not easy to get that each individual toe with tape in a toe sock. So you need to do a YouTube video for us so we can all learn how to do that.
Yes, definitely. It's and just like taping in general, like you definitely want to test out different systems before the race, because you don't want to be trying that for the first time at, a 4-day race. It can go very wrong.
We're talking about taping. I don't want to get into the weeds here, but I want to know what you use. What kind? Do you use Leuco tape? Do you use the KT tape? What kind of tape do you use? Athletic tape?
I use the Leuco tape. It tends to be the most sticky. I've used KT tape in a pinch before, but it does roll a lot easier than the Leuco tape. Yeah. So the Leuco tape just sticks the best.
Do you put any like spray, sticky, the sticky spray, or the, what is it, benzoin tenacture that makes the skins tacky too? Or do you just right on the skin?
Tape usually is enough, and I'll put a little bit of like, anti-friction stuff on the bottom of my feet just to try and reduce that after I put the tape on.
What do you mean anti-friction? Like squirrel's nut butter stuff?
Yeah. So yeah. Okay. So occasionally I'll just like put that on the bottom of the foot.
Over the tape?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Mika, have you ever? Oh, I'm sorry. Mika, have you ever? Mika, with 12 races, do you have any hallucination stories that you need to leave with us before we go?
I don't really hallucinate that much. I just get what everyone gets, so like the trees become like, you see a tree stump and it looks like a runner, or you see like, a giant tree or a rock and it looks like the aid station tent. And definitely one of my sort of warning signs is like when I start to get a lot of visual hallucinations where like I'm not focused, like I'm focusing on those instead of running. It's like, okay, I need to shut my eyes for 10 minutes till it just like reset my vision. So that's the sign that I need to lay down and just shut my eyes for like 10 minutes. So once I start seeing a lot of those, that's not good.
So Scott was crewing me, and I was having some of those moments that we all get about seeing a fallen tree turn into a bear reaching for salmon. Okay. And I thought, I'm taking a picture of this because Scott has got to see it, right?
He shows me. He gets to the aid station. He says, look at this. Doesn't this look like a bear catching a salmon? I go, it looks like a rock. I don't know what you're thinking. He took a picture of it.
Okay, I don't know if that's as normal as you think it is, because I've certainly never seen a bear trying to catch a salmon before.
You ran by the same stump. I don't know why you didn't see it. You gotta pay attention.
Hey Mika, this was an amazing fast year. We want to give credit where credit is due. I don't think we were as specific as we should have been. You broke the record by nearly 18 hours.
8 hours.
Sorry, I put a 1 in front of that. 8 hours. Excuse me. Thanks for correcting me.
Yes, I don't want people to think I'm superhuman or anything like that.
You are superhuman, but
you know what? 8 hours, 18 hours is superhuman. Tomato. But I also want to give credit to Eliza LaPierre and Allison Powell, who were second and third. They also broke the previous record. So all three of you ran an amazing race. And I think it shows that I'm not saying the race distance gets easier, these races get easier. I think that the runners are getting better and they're getting tougher. And I just think it's an amazing thing. You've won Bigfoot twice. You now are the course record holder. What does 2024 have in store for you? Are you going back to defend the course record and the victory?
So I've fallen into this pattern where I run Bigfoot on odd years. So I will actually be pacing a friend in 2024. So the next time I'll be at Bigfoot is 2025. But yeah, it's amazing just seeing, And not only that, but as the 200 distance gets more popular, it's drawing out like the bigger names and, some faster athletes. I know we've had some faster men kind of start showing up at the races, and finally seems like there are some faster and bigger named women. I mean, with like Eliza coming, and
Right.
Sally's doing a bunch of 200s this year. So I think Annie Hughes, she's gotten into the 200s and she's a really fast girl. And so I think the talent that the 200s are drawing is finally starting to kind of get higher. And so it's, everyone tends to run a better race when there's, a bigger group of faster women. As, as nice as it is to like race against yourself, when you do have other women to race and kind of help push the times, it definitely, I think, helps make everyone faster. And I really like seeing that start to happen in the 200s now.
I just forgot my question, Don. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
I had a really good one too.
Oh, I'm sure it was.
Oh, I remembered it. I remembered it. Mika, so on the odd years you run Bigfoot, and on the even years maybe you're crewing or pacing. Do you think you're a better crew or a better runner? Does being a good runner make you a better crew?
I honestly haven't done that much crewing or pacing. I paced my mom at her first 100-miler.
Wow.
And
nice.
I think I was okay at that, and I crewed her too. And other than that, I've paced friends for just short stuff. I've never actually crewed or paced a 200 before. So next year will be my first time. I get to see what your experience was like.
If you're crewing Bigfoot, I will tell you it's easier to run the race. The race trail, the track is marked better than the roads are to the aid stations. I remember sitting with 5 other crew members trying to figure out how to get to the next aid station because there's no GPS out there. The maps in 2017, I'm sure they've gotten better, but the maps were very poor, and we're trying to decide how do you get from here, and if the crow flies, it's only like 2 miles away, but you have to go, up and down 3,000 or 4,000 vertical feet and travel 35 miles to get to the next aid station. And there's so many back roads with no signage. I mean, it's difficult. Difficult.
Yeah, and then you're trying to make it there before your runner. So then you're like stressed about time. Like, oh man, this is going to take me like, this many hours to drive, and they might get there before me.
Yeah, I think
make sure you have a spare tire and a jack.
I might just show up at the aid station and be like, okay, I'll pace you the next 80 miles and not bother with the crewing part so much.
Yeah. Candace should come up with a finisher's buckle for the crew. That should be that's an accomplishment there. Mika, it was so fantastic catching up with you and learning about your experience up front and how you've evolved over these 12 races and the things you've learned and the like, as Scott likes to say, the golden nuggets that you've picked up along the way that you could pass on and share with us in the true spirit of the community. We're all out for one another to help one another, and you're letting some of your secrets go, even though you're a course champion and a record holder. You share with us what makes it happen, and so that's so good of you and nice of you. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, and anything I can say that might help someone else. I mean, that's I'm always happy to do that, and I want everyone to have a better race and to have a more enjoyable time up there. So
I can tell you one thing you can. Here's one thing you can do, Mika. To help us all slow down a little bit. That's all you need to do.
That's not going to happen, Don.
Okay.
Well, the guys up front need some company too, so
there you go.
Add pressure on them.
So lace up your shoes, get your heart rate monitor on, tape up your toes pre-race, and run
Mas.